All right, we're going to go get started just 1 minute early. My name is John Erwin. I'm the associate pastor at Agoura Bible Fellowship in Agoura Hills, California. I'd like to say that I am not an expert in suicide and depression, but unfortunately, I have had more experience with this than I'd ever want to talk about. Now, one of the things that you should be aware of today is that I speak in high schools. So I'm going to assume you are high school sophomores in a health class, and I started it. I got it. And this is my friend. Give me your name.
Steve. I'm one of the deacons here at this church.
Steve is the deacon who is serving us. He'll be bringing in cookies and snacks and all kinds of things. He is the man.
I am the dunce hat.
There we go. And so I've been involved with this topic for a number of years. I've been in ministry 41 years, married 41 years. I have 4 grandkids. You notice I start with the grandkids. Usually talk about kids. I just go right for the grandkids. 7, 5, 3, and 1. Ladies, this is what every one of you want to have on your life. Yeah. You like that? Christmas gift. I get a new case every year. And except my wife got the same case, and now we can't find each other's phones. I believe this is mine. It was September 22nd, 1987, the very first time I dealt with someone who took their life. I was a youth pastor at Evangelical Free Church in Huntington Beach, California. And on that Sunday morning, Daryl was in my class of 150 high school kids. He was laughing, talking. He was going to go water skiing with Shane the following weekend. He had been selected to be on an all-star water polo team at Huntington Beach High School that was going to go to Australia during the Christmas break. He was alive at 4 p.m. that day when he went to that water polo meeting, and his mom found him dead hanging in his closet at 5:30 p.m. that Sunday. I'm 31 years old at that time. Senior pastor somehow said I was up, so I'm going to the house. So I get that call. I'm a youth pastor. I've been at it a few years. In fact, this is why I have this color hair. If you've been a high school pastor, it turns silver. If you're a junior high pastor, you lose it. And college pastors, both things happen. And so I go to the house, and it was so surreal. There's caution tape. Paramedics there, fire, police, neighbors are huddled in little groups standing outside the caution tape, and it's just like it is in movies. I walk up. They had known I was coming. This is the pastor. They left the tape up. I walk through, and I walk into the front room, and there in a puddle of tears is mom and dad and a 13-year-old little brother. You'd think after 31 years that I would be past that trauma, and usually I am, because I've done this presentation over 500 times to over 250,000 high school students in over 100 high schools. But it's real for me, friends. This isn't just a gig for me. This is just something I do. This is something I live. And so I decided I better figure out what's going on with our kids. So I walk in there, and here's some things that I found out. There was a suicide note. The suicide note said this: life is too hard. Adios. That's it. Number 2, when I looked at that family, I stumbled into the most important thing you can do when someone has lost a child and you're there within the first 3 hours. I sat on the floor and said nothing. And I cried with them. Now, that is not an unusual thing for me, because anybody who knows me, I'm kind of an emotional guy, because I really I can't do anything. All I can do is really speak and care. I'm always impressed with these tech guys who actually do something and fix things and can make things work. But I realized right then, my words weren't what was important. What was important is that they were cared for, and the best way I could care was just the ministry of presence. And so if you're a high school student in a public school, you wouldn't get this exact presentation. So you're going to get the bonus material today. This is the presentation I will be giving at Oaks Christian on Wednesday. Every semester for 10 years, I've spoken in the health classes at Oaks Christian High School. I've been at Santa Paula High School if you're here locally. If you're from Orange County, I've spoken at Esperanza High School, Valencia High School, El Dorado High School, all the South County schools, etc. And at the end of our presentation, if you want to go to the With Hope website, you'll see the foundation that we started in 2005. And so that's how this all began, was with that experience. It continued in 2005, which was many years later, when I was the Student Ministries family pastor at Yorba Linda Friends Church. And Amber Craig took her life. She was a freshman at El Dorado High School, varsity soccer player, goalie, and we'll tell her story concurrently with Daryl's and several others as we weave their stories through this. If we go back to Daryl for a second, when you think of a depressed high school kid, what do you think of? And we're going to have a lot of chance for you to interact today in this next 55 minutes. What do you think of when you think of the typical? Isolated, wears the hoodie, angry, cutter, maybe if it's a girl, etc. Let me describe Daryl for you. Back to Daryl. 3.9 grade point average, varsity water polo player. For those, any of you work with students? Any of you work with high school students? You're high? So, dated the hot cheerleader. Has a car. Actually, the car worked. Lived in Huntington Harbor. Now would be a $5 million home. So he had every kind of advantage. And so you would have never predicted, and we'll talk about that in a moment, that he was struggling, because he gave us none of these clues. In fact, always hindsight is 20/20, looking backwards when you look at a situation versus looking forward to seeing if you can anticipate it. And let me give you just, a lot of this is just, some of this is freebies as a pastor. Don't beat yourself up about the things you didn't see, because I sure did. And so, this picture is taken 3 days before she took her life. Does that look like someone who is struggling with life? No. The night before, she did something interesting, and we'll talk about it when we talk about giving away prized possessions, but she left her goalie gloves and her bag on top of the net as she left El Dorado High School for the last time. And so on your notes there, if you'll take out that page, you can see some statistics. Now, you know that statistics, there are three kinds of statistics, right? You got, or three kinds of lies. You have black lies, white lies, and then you have statistics, says Mark Twain. And so these statistics change, and I edited my notes this week because I realized they were dated. So I went to the CDC again and looked at these statistics. But before I do that, I want to have you begin to think about, this is a very touchy little deal, but look at someone read the first statistic. What does it say on your outline? Is there a statistic at the top of this right here? Yeah. So read those for a moment silently. You read the one, then you read the next one. Go.
Suicide is the second leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds worldwide.
So that was third up until the last 2 years. What's the number one cause of death worldwide? Is accidents. What it just jumped over is homicides, and then sometimes war and famine in this age category. So what's another statistic?
A person dies from suicide every 12 minutes in the U.S.
Every 12 minutes. When I started, this was 18 minutes. Okay, give me another one.
Over 44,895 people in the U.S. kill themselves every year.
Now we know that number is much higher because suicides are masked as accidents. Insurance oftentimes doesn't cover them, etc., etc. In fact, depending on who you talk to, that for every completed attempt, there's over 100 attempts that may or may not have been kind of listed as a suicide attempt. Give me another one. Number 4. What's another one on there?
1 out of 12 college students have a suicide plan.
All right, we're going to come back to that as I tell you a story about Jamie Dungy. And what's the last one? What does it say on there?
Females are more likely to attempt suicide than males.
All right, we're going to find out why in just a bit. And so as you look at your notes here, I want to talk a little bit about depression and the Bible. First of all, one of the things that have changed dramatically in the last 20 years is no longer are we as pastors in churches saying that depression is a what? 3-letter word. Lack of faith. Sin. You got to buck up and be stronger. I mean, I have to admit, I think we just didn't know what we were talking about. And that's a bad thing if you're a pastor. If you start dispensing medical or mental health advice and you're not current with what's really going on, and that doesn't mean that the Bible has changed. It just means that we have learned a lot more. Just by listening to Brad this morning, we learned a few things. And so as we think about depression, and before we get to the Bible, one of the things that we know about depression and suicide is that everybody who is suicidal is depressed. It is the number one red flag. You will be depressed. Happy people don't kill themselves. It seems kind of obvious. By the way, I might use some humor that you're going to go, wow, this is depression and suicide, and he's using humor. When you talk to 5 health classes for 55 minutes a day, all day long, I don't want my kids to be depressed and suicidal by the end of listening to me, all right? And so I will use a little humor. I hope it's appropriate for you. But look at 2 things that are true of everybody in that picture. Well, most everybody in the picture. What's happening right here? They're smiling, except for Brittany and Abe. Both had issues at the time those pictures were taken. But what's another truth about many of those people? They are what? What's their professions? Celebrities. How many comedians? 1, 2, 3, 4. Gwyneth, I put her up here because you probably know her story. She struggled with what? Postpartum depression after her first child. And that's a very real issue in our churches. All right? Now, when we think about depression and the Bible, backwards, man, this guy is, it's like, come back to me. How many know this dude's name? Charles Spurgeon. Who's the most famous preacher in America today? Give me a name, anybody. I don't care.
Curtis Lowe.
Curtis Lowe. He's live, coming from you, right here, the Canal Valley. All right, Curtis Lowe. Who else? Who else is famous? Just anybody. I don't care. Name your favorite. Rick Warren. I'm going to talk about him. All I'm saying is this was the guy in the 1850s in London, England. Spurgeon was the most famous preacher worldwide. Probably one of the very first guys whose sermons were transcribed and books were written. And he wrestled massively with depression. In fact, little known secret, your pastor who's so up on Sundays sometimes is the lowest of the lows on Monday, because after every Sunday is a Monday. I spent most of my life in mega churches of 5,000 to 6,000. And my church in Yorba Linda, we had a pastor who wrestled with just all that. And I remember one time when we were doing 7 Easter services, and there were only 750 people at the first service. My goodness, it was like at 6 in the morning. Only God wants to come to those services at 6 in the morning, right? But he was depressed because people must not love me. Hear that comment? Anymore. And so Spurgeon wrestled with that. Job. Do you think Job wrestled with depression? Now, we don't know about neurotransmitters back then and serotonin levels, but if nothing else, his circumstances caused him to be depressed. And we'll talk difference about sadness and depression because we've all been sad. Not everybody's been depressed, and just because you're sad doesn't mean you're suicidal, and vice versa. All right? But look at some of in the New Living Translation. I hate my life. I kind of did that when I was in Algebra 2. I hated my life. My hearts are broken. Groans pour out likewise. Depression haunts my days. My weary nights are filled with pain. I cry to you, O God, but you don't answer me. That is the cry of the depressed person. Is they don't want to die. They just want a way out of their emotional pain, right? And so, you just are. Go backwards. Come back, young man. No, it won't. Maybe I should just hit this. Let's just put this down. It's like possessed. All right. But Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, wrote an entire book of a lament, right? But thank goodness for verse 23. My soul is downcast within me, yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope because of the Lord's great love. We are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. That's why we named our foundation the With Hope Foundation, because there is hope. Now, there's been some fairly high-profile suicides in the last year and a half, and I think the one that rocked a lot of people's world was Jared Wilson just 1 month ago. Pastor at Calvary Chapel or Harvest with Greg Laurie had his own blog, Anthem of Hope, and that was just on September 9th. A year before that, Andrew Stocklin, pastor at Inland Community Church, August of 25th, 2018. So I'm focusing on student depression and suicide, but I think if you're in the church world, you're aware of those situations. And so these are the statistics that we went over already. And because this happens every 12 minutes, and we looked at these, I said I'd come back to the 1 out of 12 college students. How many recognize this bald dude here? Tony Dungy, world champion Super Bowl coach of the Indianapolis Colts. Why would I pick a picture of a football coach? Well, I like football, but there's a story behind this. His son Jamie would have been 33 years old. I was his t-ball coach for Jamie when he was 5 years old. My son and Jamie went to the same little kindergarten class in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. When at the time, Tony was a coach for the Vikings. Still my second favorite team, by the way. The Rams have wormed their way back into my heart. I'm a Vikings and I bleed purple. And so he was like every 5-year-old. I mean, he ran to third base his first hit. No, wrong way. Jamie, this way. Played with butterflies out in right field. Filled his glove with dirt at third base. And when I talk to students, I say, how many of you have a younger brother or sister? And they raise their hands. I go, can you imagine your younger sibling taking their life 14 years from now? Because no one sees it. I mean, he was like every other 5-year-old. And so one of the things that we do know is that females are going to attempt, females are more likely to attempt to it, but the guys are 4 times more likely to be successful, and there's a very specific reason why. Use your thinking cap. Why are guys more successful at killing themselves?
Testosterone.
They have a lot of testosterone.
It's more violent.
It's the methodology,
Yeah.
all right? It's the weapon of choice. What is the number one choice for boys? Guns. What do girls typically start with? One of 2 things. Pills. And the precursor to that, for those of you, they're cutters, right? By the way, any of you working with students, just keep a track of the girls who are cutting with the spangles and the hoodies when it's 95 degrees outside in July. By the way, our psychologist friend knows that girls are much more sophisticated in their cutting because they're not cutting here anymore. They're cutting on their panty lines, right? Because no one's going to show me your legs, right? And parents are under the breasts, etc. So that's something that is very alarming to those of us in this area. Now, there's been a big deal about bullying, and I'm just going to pause to comment only about this because the media, it's a firestorm that bullying is a cause of suicide. Bullying is a symptom of a culture that has been bullying people for a long, long time. Because this bullying, this one in particular, is associated with a kid who was gay, then it gets a lot more attention. And I want to just stop here for a moment because, I could have, every year, this is back when I used to take USA Today. I was faithful about cutting out every article I found, and now I can do it online. But then I'm not so good about copying and pasting and saving it. But this is ripped out of the headline. Some of you remember this kid. He was the Rutgers kid who jumped off the George Washington Bridge after his roommate secretly video streamed his intimate encounter with another man in their dorm room. And Duran DeVee actually went to jail for this, and it wasn't obviously appropriate. Phoebe Prince is the original girl that was bullied. How many of you ladies, this will reflect whether you watched this, how many watched a certain movie called Mean Girls, circa 2006 with Lindsay Lohan? This girl was literally bullied to death. Phoebe Prince, a teenage girl from Ireland who killed herself after being raped and enduring months of torment by classmates in person and online. And they actually arrested 5 kids from South Hadley High School. And the worst part of this is it was common knowledge in social media circles of what was going on. This is at the front end. In fact, back then it wasn't Facebook. It was what? MySpace. How many have a MySpace account? Oh my goodness. If you did, you probably had some band that you were in. All right? And so we know bullying's an issue, but I don't believe that it is a causal factor in suicide, but it's one of those cluster of things that I'll show you when we get to clues that we should be aware of. Now, we're going to play a little game just like I do in class. I need 5 volunteers. Raise those hands quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It won't be embarrassing. Number 1, come up here. Number 2, come up here. Number 3, I saw that hand. Come up here. Line yourselves up along this wall. Bring your paper with you because you're gonna decide whether certain things are true or false. Who's my 4th volunteer? It's you with the Adidas hat. All right. Stand in order on the wall. Only number 1 can stand next to the screen, and then you can go sit down. And then number 5. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to play true or false. All right, not truth or dare. True or false. All right. Asking someone, are you thinking of committing suicide, may lead a person to something. True or false. Now, I don't just need the answer because you're going to be 50-50 on this. There's no, I don't know. You got to pick. But you got to give me a reason why. But I'm going to pause sometimes in this because I think some of you are going to use material or take material and use it. When you're dealing with kids, you can't just for 55 minutes, right? So I try to involve our kids so they're a part of it. So what do you think? Think it's true or false?
Oh, okay.
Survey says.
I would say true.
Let's see what the survey says. Oh, it's false. Okay. Now, why did you think it was true, though?
Because it puts it into someone's mind, even if
Okay.
it wasn't.
All right. Someone who would have said false, what would you say in response to that? Go ahead.
Probably even clear their mind. Oh no, I'm really attempting. No, I don't want it to do that.
Okay.
So it actually goes the opposite way.
Yeah, what we found is you have implanted, you can have a seat, thank you. You have implanted the idea. Believe me, if you're asking the question, they've been giving cries of help for a long time, right? Okay, good job. Let's try it again. Second question. Those who talk about suicide will never actually do it. True or false?
True.
Bingo. False. Oh. Actually, over 80% of the time, there will be some. You can have a seat. Thanks for playing. This is Ellen's show. You're gone. At least I'm not dropping you into something. 80% of the time, they're going to have talked about. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to say, "Hey, tomorrow, 2 p.m. at Bedrosian over at Oaks Christian, I'm going to take my life." It'll be more veiled than that. What might be some comments that are, quote, talking about it? What do you think people do when they're talking about it?
Criticizing it, maybe.
Maybe criticizing or things like this. How about this?
Okay.
Hey, would you miss me if I weren't here? And
Right.
hey, if you were giving my eulogy at my funeral, what would you say? I mean, it's kind of out there. Sometimes they write in kind of they these kind of guarded kind. You can't quite understand the post. In fact, most Twitter posts, I don't understand them anyway. Hashtag this, and I don't know what they mean anyway. But those who talk about will not actually do it. Actually, that is false.
Did they ask what heaven is like? Is it
Some people ask what heaven's like, but most of the kids that I've dealt with have come from a Christian perspective, which is a double whammy for them. Because they've been told if you commit suicide, if you grew up in a Catholic background, and maybe we have some Catholic folks here. Do you have any folks from the Catholic Church here today? Talk to me. Well, great. Welcome. Do you know what the Catholic Church teaches on suicide? I'm just curious.
Yes.
What does it say?
It now is teaching that it's a mental illness and that it's God forgives.
Historically, they taught that?
Historically, I don't know, but I know that's what's teaching us currently.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, and so for whether it's Catholic Church, Protestant Church, but if you start with the premise that depression and or suicide is a sin, that leads you down a very narrow path that we don't believe, I don't teach, and I don't think it is. I don't believe, this is just cuts the chase. I don't believe suicide is the unpardonable sin either, all right? So they will talk about it. All right, let's see. Number 3, suicide, this is a trick question, I'm just going to be upfront. Suicide's inherited or runs in families. Wow. True or false?
False.
False. They're learning. You're seeing what I'm playing with this game. False. Why is it false?
Why is it false? It's a behavior. I think it's a learned. I mean, it's social media, whatever. They heard about this, the attention.
Are there some things that do run as part of our family history? What are some of those things?
Depression.
Depression. That's why it's an unfair question. There is no suicide gene. You may have a seat. There's no suicide gene, but depression runs in family. Heart disease runs in families. That's why they take this long intake from you when you get a new doctor, right? So, by the way, we do see copycat issues, not so much in families, but in schools. This is a total sidebar conversation because I never talk about this with kids. If we make too big a deal about suicide in the school with memorials and this and that, it elevates it. And then other lonely, depressed kids who are wrestling with, well, at least they got attention, right? If you ignore it, what does that do for the poor family? You don't care about me. And that's what happened with Daryl. Like, we had to write, that was my first deal of walking that tightrope with a kid who took his life. How much do we talk about it at church? How much do we talk about school? And I got involved with the school at Huntington Beach High School. Hundreds of dollars poured into a memorial. Ended up setting up a mental health clinic on campus. They set up a library and some other things. But for the most part, after someone commits suicide within the year, nobody's listening, nobody cares. And the real ministry in the church to families is not 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. It's year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right? By the way, Daryl's little brother is a pastor at Rolling Hills Covenant Church. And one of the most amazing speaking things I ever got to do was when I spoke to their entire staff about mental health and depression, suicide, with his permission, telling his brother's story. And boy, with a bunch of pastors who have heard it all of a sudden they were all listening, right? And so it doesn't, there is no suicide gene. Is it a problem of specific social or economic class? Rich kids kill themselves more than poor kids. That's the issue.
False. I don't think suicide.
That is right. It is false. If it was true, we would only speak at that economic strata in those schools that it was happening. Interesting enough, how many of you know who and where Oaks Christian High School is? If you live in this area, you know it. This is, for my New Jersey friend, it's a very prestigious, expensive, private Christian school. Christian meaning the teachers are Christian, not necessarily the students. That's a whole other discussion, right? So when I talk about God and suicide and depression, they're like, I don't believe in God, so I don't care if I go to hell, because there isn't one, right? That kind of thing. And by the way, the first 6 years I was speaking at Oaks, there was a suicide attempt every year in that time period. Haven't had one in a couple years right now, but at least it's been publicized. So I'm speaking at Sao Paulo High School, and this is an assembly with 600 kids. It's on the other side of the Conejo. How many know where Sao Paulo is? What do you expect the ethnic diversity to be in that school? What's the number one ethnicity? Hispanic. Man, if I knew Spanish. Do you know Spanish? I could have used you there, all right? But they speak Spanish, but boy, were they attentive. Not anything what I thought when you get 600 kids in an assembly and I'm talking, right? And I asked them, I said, who kills themselves more? Kids with no money or lots of money? And they go, and without a doubt, okay, oh, it's those rich kids, right? And I said, why would you say that? They said, because they have it all, they take for granted, and they've never lived with adversity at all. So, So I talked to Oaks kids. Who kids? Oh, those kids over at, and pick your school, Compton, pick any inner city school, whatever. I go, why would you say that? Well, because life is hard, man, and you just get beaten down, you just give up. Unlike you don't have any hardships. Well, we do too. Oh, so maybe this transcends your economic status, right? Or your social status. And they kind of got the picture. Most suicides occur at night. Well, group quiz. True or false?
I think that's true.
True? Well, you should have learned. All these were false. They were all...
At least I didn't know.
No offense, you're not quite as quick as the sophomores by the third one. But I don't know. It's false. I don't know why, but I know it's false. It's kind of like, what's the answer? I know it's not Jesus, but Jesus is usually right 9 out of 10 times, right? Just say Jesus. No, I'm describing a squirrel. How did you come up with Jesus? All right? No, most suicides don't occur at night. It's false. There is a 4-hour time period for high school kids when they would take their life the most when two prevalent factors are coming into congruence. One is after school and when parents aren't home. So if we had to pick a time, it's not scientific, 2 to 6 in the afternoon, or the way parents work today, 3 to 9, who knows. But it's after school, and usually because there's a besetting or traumatic event that triggers something in high school, which I will talk about. Now, what are the causes? Now we're to the meat of this. There are 5 causes. You're going to tell me what the first cause is by looking at your fill-ins, reading the definition, and tell me what the cause is. First one is, we've talked about it already.
Depression.
Survey says depression. Now, what's the difference between depression and sadness? Because depression, we can, I can read you the clinical definition of depression, but that's not all that helpful, I don't think. I think we know what depression is, but what are the differences between sadness and depression?
Depression is an illness already.
Long term. Number one difference, it's long term. People are sad. How many of you have ever been sad? Does that mean you're suicidal? No. What do we get sad about? All kinds of things. What?
I just said sad things.
Sad things. What makes here's what made me sad.
There's
A loss.
Okay, my father-in-law died of 18 years struggling with Parkinson on September 10th. We are sad, but actually there's hope because he's now in heaven with Jesus. These broken relationship, we'll talk about with high school kids. That is almost 50% of suicides that I've dealt with high school kids involved a breakup relationally. All right? What's other things that cause us to be sad? Anybody ever have to put a pet down? A dog? Now a cat, I can't believe I put that on tape. Anyway, when we put our dog down after 16 years, I cried like a baby. I might have cried as much when we put Molly down as when my dad died. By the way, you're not rational when someone close to you dies. Just agree to that. I'm going to do my dad's funeral. This is in July of 2002, and I get a ticket because I didn't have my seatbelt on my way from Anaheim to Upland. And that, I think the policeman wanted to take me in for psychiatric care because I was like, why did I give a ticket? Then I go from crying to I'm mad, like, you're giving me a ticket? And my wife went, calm down, dear. And he goes, and she just let him out. His dad died, and he's going to his funeral, and you're giving him a seatbelt ticket. My normally nice wife was kind of in his face, and I went, honey, be nice, it's okay. You're giving me a ticket? Right? So, depression. Now, one of the things that we know about depression is that they don't know why they're depressed, right? They wake up. Any of you who've wrestled with depression, that's the debilitating part, is there's no reason. You're like, why am I depressed? They just wake up that way, right? And so when one of those, I could have put this up here, do kids really want to kill themselves? No, they just want the pain to go away, that emotional pain to go away. I won't show you the notes. I have suicide notes of what kids wrote and what they were dealing with and that isolation. Now, if you were going to leave this room, this is not a trick question, how would you leave this room? Someone get up and demonstrate leaving this room. Anybody, how about you right on the end? What a concept. He has a door and he leaves. See you later. All right, now come back. But when you are depressed, imagine being in an emotional room that you can't perceive that there's any way out, and so you're literally beating your head on the wall, not physically, but figuratively, because you're not thinking, this isn't going to last, and they can't think clearly. And so they're depressed. Another is they're what? Look at the next one. Tell me what that is. What is helpless? Nothing will ever change. Hopelessness. That's hopelessness. They feel hopeless. Nothing will ever change. 13-year-old girl in my ministry in Huntington Beach, that same ministry where Daryl killed himself, she was a diabetic. She decided she didn't want to take her diabetic medicine or shots. She hated it. She hated life. She was depressed. So she purposely OD'd. She was in a coma for 6 months, and when she came out of the coma, she was no longer herself and had diminished mental capacity and ended up living in an assisted living home until her mid to late 30s where she ultimately died. She couldn't feed herself. She couldn't control her bowel movements, etc., etc. Purpose. There's a void or lack of meaning in someone's life. Isn't it interesting that years earlier I used this slide
Yeah.
only for poor Rick on April 6, 2013 to his son Matt, after years of struggling with mental illness, took his life that night. Now, where do we find purpose and meaning in life? When I do this in a public school versus a private school, there are very different answers. But let's play a little game here together. Give me where you find purpose and meaning in life. How do you find it? Now, I realize it's a Christian answer, and that Jesus is the right answer, but all the right answers begin with the letter F. All right? Let's play along.
Faith.
Faith. By the way, I wish faith made it in the top 5. I just pray it gets in the top 5 at Oaks this Wednesday. Faith. What else?
Followers.
See, social media savvy. Followers was never in the top 10 until the last couple years. You got to have followers. Faith and followers. What else?
Friends.
Faith, followers, friends.
Family.
Faith, followers, friends, family. Keep going. There's 25 more. I'm a hopeless alliterator. Fun. And every sophomore guy goes, yeah. Faith, family, fun, followers, friends, fun. Football for the soccer players. Football for the total slackers. Foosball. Fame, fortune, finances for the guys. Females for the girls. Flirting, and it goes on and on. Best answer ever, though? Santa Paula High School. In that assembly with 600 kids, I said, okay, you've exhausted all the list. I think we're done here. He goes, no. This kid stood up. I go, you got one more answer after? And I read all these answers. I read faith, family, friends, future, focus, fame, fun, food, females, flirting, fooling around, fitness, fortune, football, foosball, fantasy football, fishing, fathers, and followers, that I'm now going to add to my list. He goes, no, man, you missed one. And by the way, I don't do that Hispanic accent very well, but when I get to my Chinese accent, because I had kids living with me, with permission, they let me use this illustration here in a moment. He goes, frijoles! I said, seriously? You're living for the beans, huh? All right. Whatever. But here's the deal. Ultimately, this, give me a knuckle, might be the best response I've had in like the last hour, or 30 minutes. The bottom line is, there's a lot of things that you can have temporary fixes in life. We know ultimately that Jesus is the right answer. We ultimately know that before you die, you have to answer these 3 big questions. Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? And that purpose in life, which now has sold the best-selling book ever, other than what? The Bible, right, gives us some of that to deal with. 4th one is stress. Unreasonable pressure, succeed or less expectation. Now, I gave you a green sheet that has nothing to do with the seminar, but I did some Billy Graham. I was part of a trauma training thing. And that's the stuff on trauma. And since a lot of us have been traumatized, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Woolsey fire and borderline shooting, if you're from this area. This was stuff we handed out, and I had extras, and we're not talking about it today. That's a free bonus thing for coming to this seminar. All right? Stress. All right. What is the number one thing that high school kids are stressed about? In most families. Yeah. Huh?
Unpopularity.
Yeah.
Lack of popularity. What else? Grades. School. Academics. So let me tell you a story about Alan. So for 4 years, we housed international students from China at our home because they went to Oaks Christian. Very strong academic. Adam finished in the top 10 in the school. But he wasn't your typical academic nerd, right? We know what those guys are. They have like the pocket protectors with all the colored pens. But he did take 9 AP classes in the 2 years that he lived with us. And so very smart. And he got an A- on a quiz. This is only for those of you who are Asian moms. And I think it's your term, not mine. You are called what? It begins with Tiger Mom has a phone call about the A-. He's depressed about phone call with Mom. And I said, what's wrong? I got an A-. I go, I'm going, yeah, I would have loved to have an A-, because you're taking, he took macro and microeconomics. There wasn't even a class. He just took the AP test and got a 5 on those. So it's an A-, Alan. Life's too short to be upset about A-. He goes, oh, Mr. Owen, you have no idea how big a deal this is to me. Now, I know that's not a very good interpretation of him, but I said, Alan, I wanted to do it because it was the way he goes, oh, Mr. Owen, you can never talk like me. You're not as smart as me. And I go, you're right. I'm definitely not as smart as you. So I'll drop the accent. So the bottom line is, I said, so what's the big deal? Do you know what an A- is in my culture? What is an A-? It's an Asian F, right? That's his words, not mine. Now, I've talked to other moms. No one will actually admit it, but I can tell you that I never had to have him study. In fact, he was so obsessed with studying, I just tried to get him to have a life other than just studying, right? And so that stress, that unreasonable pressure to succeed, oftentimes self-inflicted, not parentally inflicted. So parents, sometimes you take the rap for what our kids are self-motivated, and they brought that on themselves. Now, escape. An impulsive response to a temporary problem. An impulsive response to a temporary problem. What might some of those things look like for high school students? Huh? Substance abuse, alcohol, huh? Sex. Lack of it, or having sex, getting pregnant. Yeah, Mom is kind of interested. Like, what do you mean by that? By the way, I get some very interesting answers from them, but most of the time, there's some relational thing that happens that puts them over the edge, right? And so one of the things that we talk about is how do we interpret life? From a Christian perspective, is life supposed to be easy or hard? Hard. Why do we know that? Because the Bible says it where? James chapter 1. Consider all joy, my brothers and sisters, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And most kids say, enough with the endurance. I just don't need any more trials. And it kind of is a snowballing effect. An impulsive response to a temporary problem. We'll talk about the number one impulsive response to a temporary problem is a relational issue with a boy breaking up with a girl or vice versa. And we'll look at that in just a moment. Now, what should we look for? Just like on your car, you have a dashboard. If it's a Tesla, it looks nothing like this anymore. But what are the clues we should look for? Now, I've listed them for you. I want you to check the 2 that you want me to talk about. Go. You got 30 seconds. Check the ones you want. I'm going to talk about them all, but just I want to make sure I talk about these 2. Or 2 that you check. Look at those. Any of those clues, and we'll make sure we talk about them. Okay, what do you want to talk about of those lists? More in depth than the rest of them. Anybody?
Feeling unwanted.
We'll talk about that. All right, what else?
Significant changes in behavior.
All right, we'll talk about those 2. Actually, I'm going to talk about all of them, but some more than others. Verbal expression or thoughts of suicide. I already gave you the statistic. How many times will they verbalize it before they actually make an attempt? Or how much will they talk about it? What percentage of people? Over 80%. All right? They will talk about it, all right, in some way. All right? Another clue. Giving away valued possessions. This is an interesting one. Why would you give away a valued possession? And why is that a suicide precursor? Why would someone give something? It's a clue. What? But there's something behind why do they give away their Cody Bellinger rookie card? Why do they make arrangements to have their pet watched? Why do they clean their bedrooms? Because they're preparing. They're preparing, right? And kids do it in a weird way. Amber was the messiest person on the planet, and her room was immaculate the day she took her life. By the way, I say that to parents and go, no, my kid started cleaning his room. No, they could be cleaning the room for a different reason because their socks are sinky and they got a girlfriend now or something. But so giving away valued possessions may be a clue. By the way, this is a great website. Suicide is Preventable. It's not on this. Write it down. Suicide is Preventable. Great graphics. If I have time and we have internet, I'll go to it at the end of the seminar. What's another one here? Suddenly becoming cheerful after prolonged depression. Interesting enough, What is the dilemma for the kids when they're in the debate mode? Like, should I, should I not? Should I, should I not? What's the problem? They are what? In the middle of that, they are what? They're conflicted. They're stressed. Is it a sin? Am I going to go to hell? You know, all the Christian kids, right? Or even quasi-Christian kids, they're worried about that. But once they've made the decision, psychologists tell us there's a 48 to 72 hour window of what they call temporary euphoria. And what that means is the decision's made. Now I can. In fact, parents were shocked because that picture of Amber 3 days before, 10 days earlier she attempted OD. They thought it was food poisoning. But in that last 3 days, happiest she'd ever been. She wrote 5 suicide letters. I won't read any of them to you. But she had come to peace with her issue. All right. So suddenly becoming cheerful after prolonged depression.
Were the suicide letters to different people?
Huh?
Were the suicide letters to different people?
5 different people, including her parents. And one that was just horrible about what she was feeling, and I don't know if it was ever shared. I won't go into it because we're on tape here. Significant changes in behavior habits. What changes in their behavior habits? See, it can be almost anything, but it is what is ever opposite of what they normally were. Good students become what? Bad students. Non-druggies, non-pot smokers become, and I'll talk about that in a second too. So they sleep more. Why do they sleep more? Flight behavior, escapism, right? So you can sleep. By the way, why is it when we were young we hated naps and now we get to be and now I can't wait to have a nap, right? Oh, I want to have a nap. All right. Breaking up with a boyfriend or girlfriend. Almost every suicide that I dealt with, except for the first one, had some relational component to it. Daryl's is still an enigma to me, right? I don't know. I'll be scratching my head the rest of my life. True story. Mark's a senior, Janice is a junior. Dated for 2 years. Janice decides to break up with Mark. Mark is beside himself. When you're puppy love, high school love, By the way, I bet I did meet my wife when she was a freshman, when I was a junior, and we've been married 41 years. So it can happen, but for the vast majority, you're not meeting your wife or your husband when you're 16 and 14, right? So she breaks up with him. He's distraught. It's a couple weeks later. He's working with his dad, and they had these trees that they were trimming branches, and they're big trees. And he's about 40 feet up in a tree and decides to jump out of the tree to kill himself. Now, this is where my perverse sense of humor might offend you, but I mean, when I talk to kids, if you're going to kill yourself, I'm telling you, trees are not a good plan, right? Because trees have what? Branches. He had every single branch go, boom, 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 boom. He's like a pinball machine coming down, boom. All he does is break his wrist. No, I'm really depressed. I can kill myself, right? So I go to the hospital to see him. No one knows about this. I don't know about this, but I do know that they've broken up. They're checking him for, concussion protocol, and he's going to be held overnight. So I go to Mark, and you can be Mark. I said, hey, Mark, what happened? How'd you fall out of the tree? Think of epitome of Huntington Beach surfer dude. Dude, man, I just fell. I tripped. I'm thinking, you're tripping, but I don't know if you tripped. But you tripped? How do you trip? You're 40 feet up in the tree. Didn't you have a rope around you? Yeah, dude, I don't know. I just tripped. And I did this. I'm not buying it. He looks at me and goes, what? You know how kids, what? That kind of, your kids never do that to you, right? So I'm thinking, and this is a God thing, right? And this is also why you don't ever come to me for counseling. I just said, Mark, are you sure this doesn't have anything to do with Janice? No. What would it have to do with Janice? Didn't you guys break up? Yeah. Why is he angry? 10 minutes remaining? Oh my goodness, and so many stories. I said, are you sure? And I just waited. Oh yeah, tears start coming down. Oh, so he's bawling like a baby. And I said, Mark, I get it. But Mark, let me ask you a question. What were you thinking? And he looks at me. This is like the Bob Newhart counseling note. What do you do to stop? Stop it! All right. What were you thinking? And just like you, he starts laughing and goes, I have no idea, Pastor John. What was I thinking? You clearly weren't thinking. And we start laughing. We're looking around like, anybody hear this? And I said to him, Mark, and to this day, I don't know why I said it, but it's still true. I said, Mark, women might be worth living for, but they're not worth dying for. and then he laughs again, right? And I'm thinking, okay. Now, that sounds like that's a nice little bow put on the story. Well, he ended up going to counseling, and actually he had some issues. He wasn't, eventually. His dad was an alcoholic, and there was all kinds of other issues that were going on in his family. Fast forward the story, 7 years, and I'm doing a wedding. Guess who got married? Yeah, Janice and Mark. I did their wedding. They live in Newport Beach. They have a couple of kids. Could not work that into the ceremony, though. Yeah, just think how much he loved you, Janice. He's jumping out of trees for you. So every high school kid who's ever heard this presentation does this with me. Would you raise your right hands? You're all high school kids. Raise your right hands and please repeat after me. I do promise. To never jump out of a tree. For anyone. There you go. All right. I got 7 minutes. I will not end early. I can guarantee you that. All right. Withdrawal mood or prolonged depression goes on days, weeks, months. And by the way, I am not anti-medicine. I believe there are some medications that are very helpful. I'm not getting into serotonin and brain chemistry, but clearly there is medications that help. There are herbal remedies that help, and I'm not going to debate which was better or whatnot, but you should talk to your doctor, all right? Falling grades or declining quality in schoolwork. Why is that a clue for high school kids? Why would their grades going down is like, what's going on here? Think about it. Who cares? I'm going to be dead before I have to take my finals. Now, I tell the high school kids there's 2 other reasons why your grades go down. The first I experienced when I had a 4.0 and then I met my wife. And my grade, I mean more, I didn't care about conjugating verbs in Spanish. I got a B my spring semester of my junior year because of her. Now, by the way, we've been blaming women since the garden. The woman you gave me, that's why I got a B because of Cheryl. She's so enticing. By the way, she's here today, and she's heard that, and she is the love of my life. The second reason why your grades don't go down, kids, high school kids, watch this. You're smoking the doobies, aren't you, huh? Yeah. They don't even know what a doobie is. Anyway, so yeah, if you're a pot smoker, like, oh yeah, whoopee. And by the way, I tell them, you're not smarter because you're smoking pot. You're a freaking idiot, right? Putting your underwear on your head, going outside. Woo! And by the way, ladies, why would you smoke pot? You're going to get the freshman 10 while you're 16. You're going to gain weight. You're going to get the munchies. Not good, not good. By the way, I know it's now legal, and that's changing my story just slightly. Well, it's legal, Pastor John. Yeah, well, you're still 16. It's not legal for you, all right? I get it but what are the kids telling us now? But I have it for medicinal purposes, right? All right. Increased drugs or alcohol use. Now, this is a different reason. Why are they using more drugs if you're depressed? Because you're doing what with your emotional pain? Numbing it, anesthetizing your pain. Very good. All right, we talked about being bullied to death. Now, final couple things. 3 things never to do, 3 things you should do. Never belittle or shame them. Never belittle or shame them. There was a seminar last year that had like helpful sayings and not helpful sayings. And if you go on their website, it was really, she had some really good stuff. I can't even pronounce her last name. And I thought I had it here. But there are some things that are helpful and not helpful. And if when in doubt, just shut up. Because, probably quoting them Romans 8:28, all things that work together are good, brother. Yeah, I know, theoretically. And yet there are times where, quite frankly, we say the stupidest things at the most inappropriate times. And since it's not my material, go to their website from last year and look up those helpful phrases. So don't blow or shame. By the way, who tends to be more empathetic, men or women? Who's more empathetic in these situations, men or women? Typically women are, but a lot of times guys just don't know how to process their feelings, right? And so they try to make fun or use humor to try to get them out of it, all right? Don't try to analyze them or tell them your interpretation of their feelings. You're not Oprah. You're not Dr. Phil. And so I don't need high school kids to be psychologists. I need them to be friends. And then this is the most important thing. Never promise to keep a secret. I'm speaking at Orange Lutheran High School to 600, 700 kids in their auditorium. And these 3 girls come up and say, hey, what do you do if you have a friend who's definitely depressed, maybe suicidal, but they don't want to tell anybody? Because the whole deal is go take them to a coach or a priest or a rabbi or a trusted adult. And as I'm speaking to these 3 girls, I realize I think the person they're talking about is one of these 3 girls. So 1, 2, 3, stand up. 3 girls. You're my 3 girls. Stand up. So I'm talking, and these 2 are doing all the talking, and this one isn't saying a word. And so I'm asking some questions. What have you tried? Whatever. And she's not saying a word. And it dawns on me, the friend is right there. So I go to her, I said, are you the one that they're talking about? She goes, no. And these 2 almost imperceptibly take 2 steps back, and while I'm talking to her, I'm catching on the side, yes, she is. Right? And she sees that mouth, and she goes off on the friends. You're going to have a seat. I thought you were my friends. Why are you narking me out? Blah, 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 and just went off on them. And one problem for kids is they don't realize, do you want to have a relationship that might be temporarily strained because of truth and honesty and getting people help? Or do you risk the chance of keeping that secret and the kid dies? Right? And so she got help, the counselor got her help, and in the end, they patched it all up. So temporarily, your friends might be upset with you, but would you rather save a life or hold the secret? All right? So I'm speaking in Detroit, and this letter is being passed around in a health class on depression and suicide. I can't make this stuff up. So Courtney, I really hope that no one finds out about what I'm going to do. I haven't made a final decision, but I know what I want. Suicide's my only answer. I'm hoping that something good will happen, but I doubt it. Love always, Michelle. Thank goodness Courtney walks up and says, what do I do with this, Pastor John? I said, where is she? And she's in the back room. I got the teacher, the counselor involved, and she got help. Again, so many things happen where kids think there's a temporary issue, there's this deal that happens that you wonder if they're putting all the pieces together and they're just not thinking logically. Do take every situation seriously. When in doubt, check it out. See, what about crying wolf syndrome? I'm like, well, they're going to cry wolf, but that's not our judge to play judge and jury. Just get them help. And Facebook even has a way of reporting that now in terms of getting people help. Take them to a trusted adult. We've talked about that. And then tell them there's hope. Tell them there's hope. And so I'm going to close with a band that most of you have never heard of. And if you have to go, you got to go because it's going to be more than 3 minutes. The band is called Good Charlotte. And they came out with this song a few years ago. It was picked up by some groups, and it I think, embodies what we're talking about here. I hope you can hear it.
He was our little baby, even though he was 17 years old. When she died, she was only 15. That was Erin, and she was 19. Couldn't live with what he had done, so he took his own life. I wish that I were here still. That they were with us. Because I know what it's like to be a survivor. I know what it's like to be left behind.
We all feel the same way as you do. We all go through the same things.
committed suicide. He shot himself in the head.
Lost my boyfriend to suicide. He was 26 years old.
I don't think I would have ever seen it coming.
I think I know that he's listening. And if he is, I just want him to know I love him.
It's not the right order of things. You're not supposed to bury your children. They're supposed to bury you.
The last thing he said to me was, have a fun time with Grandma, Mom, and I'll see you on Monday. And I'll be waiting for Monday the rest of my life. Okay.
Wonder what I would be like if my father were still alive.
Hang on, because everybody goes through it.
I tried to hurt myself, but I'm glad I'm still here. There's always a way out, always. I can't imagine not being here now.
It's okay to get help. You're gonna miss out on so much.
What is the highest age group suicidal? I mean, what is age group, like if you're 10?
All the statistics I was primarily giving were for 13 to 24 year olds. That's who I'm focusing on. The reasons for adult suicide in older age is a whole different, 78% of people who take their life are men, which is an interesting statistic, but ladies get a little more attention because of the attempts. Hey, we're out of time, and I want to honor your time, and I'll stay and answer questions, but thank you so much for being here today.